So this is an oral history interview with Miss Betsey Young in her home in Lafayette, California. The date is April 28th, 2014. The time is 1 o'clock p.m. And the interviewer is Ryan McKinley. So, when were you born?
November 12th, 1918.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born in Berkeley, and then my family was in Oakland.
Okay.
And I immediately came back to our home in Oakland. Okay. My family was in the funeral business on 5th Avenue and East 15th Street.
Okay. And what was your father's name?
My father's name was Anker, Andker, and in Danish it was Dam and Kjør, Andkjer.
Okay. And
both my mother and father were from Denmark.
Okay. And when did they move over to America?
Oh, many
years.
Years. I don't know the exact.
Okay. Were they married when they came over, or did they meet later?
No.
Or no? Okay. So your father came over first, do you know? Or?
My father came over first, and he was married.
Okay.
And had 2 children. And then his wife died, and my mother and father met each other at the Danish Hall, and they were married. So he had 2 daughters, so I had 2 half-sisters.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when he came over, do you know what he did when he first came over?
Yes, he was a tailor.
Okay. Then he went into the funeral business after.
He became a funeral director.
Okay. And
after he and my mother were married, my mother and father ran the business together.
There. Okay. And your mother, she came over about the same time, or was much later?
No. Earlier.
Earlier, okay.
Yeah. And she came to Sacramento first, and then moved down to Oakland. And I had an aunt who came over from Denmark, her older sister. So she lived in Sacramento.
Okay.
And then my mother came to Oakland. And then when she and my father were married, they moved to the mortuary.
Okay.
5th Avenue and East 15th Street.
Wow. Okay. I kind of know where that is, actually. That
you
area.
Do?
I was just on East 15th the other night, actually.
Well, it has changed.
Oh, it's changed. Okay, it was a different East 15th. Okay. Do you know how they came in contact, your father and mother? Just so
other than the Danish Hall.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so when they first got together, your father was still running the tailor shop, do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
That.
Okay.
I believe he was in the funeral business when he and my mother met.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they met and they went to Oakland together, and they were they had started the funeral business. They were working in the funeral business. Was it
when they were married, my father was already in the funeral business.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he was working for somebody else, or he owned the...
No, it was Anker and Company.
Huh.
So he was alone then.
Okay. And then about how long after your parents were married were you born?
I had 2 brothers. They had 3 children. My brother Norman, brother Owen, and myself. And So Norman was 8 years older, and Owen 4 years older, and then I
And
came along.
You're the youngest of the three. You're the youngest of the three?
Yes.
Okay. And so, what did I'm just curious. What did Norman do as he grew up?
He was in the funeral business.
Okay.
Both of my brothers were. After college, they came into the business with my mother and father.
Okay.
And Norman went to embalming college. Owen did not, but Norman did. And then my father died, and my mother remarried another Dane, Mr. Joseph Carl Peterson, and he joined the business with my mother. And he had been married before and had 2 boys and a girl. So I had stepsister and 2 stepbrothers.
Wow. So your father...
The sisters of Mr. Anchor are my half.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just... okay. And so they lived in Oakland up until about when, do you know? They were in Oakland.
Gosh. It's been a long time since... not in the 30s, my stepfather died. So, because one of my stepbrothers, Peterson, he went into the funeral business with my mother and my stepfather.
Okay.
So that was my 2 brothers and my stepbrother and my mother all running the business.
Okay.
And all living at the funeral home.
Oh, okay.
We had a very large home, 3 floors, and the business was in the basement, the embalming business, and then the funeral arrangements made in the 1st floor. We lived on the 2nd, and there were bedrooms and a large attic room it was. But it was a finished attic room. And later on, after I was in college, I started dance there, teaching dance. So.
Wow. Okay. I'm curious. Growing up in Oakland, where did you go to elementary school? Do you remember?
At Franklin School. Was able to walk to Franklin School. Do you know what?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, the business was on 5th Avenue and East 15th Street.
Okay.
And Franklin School was on 9th.
Okay.
So that was nice. And then after the 6th grade, I went to Westlake Junior High School. And then that was a 3-year school. That was a brand new school in Oakland. Graduated from there 1933 and went to Oakland High School. Graduated from there 36 and went to the University of California. Graduated there 1940.
Okay. And Do you have like a very vivid memory of your elementary school? Like anything that specifically stood out, a specific events or anything?
Yes. Okay. And I do remember that kindergarten very well, remembering putting a mat down on the floor and taking naps. And I remember milk and graham crackers. Did you have that when you were in...
I don't think so. We had milk, but I don't remember getting graham crackers when I was younger. Yeah.
And that's about it. And yeah, I remember quite well playing on the bars and the slide and being in a dance, doing a little dance in their auditorium.
Okay.
So I had started taking dance from Grace Burroughs when I was 5 years old. So.
Okay. So you've been a dancer basically all your life then?
All my life.
Okay. Wow. And so growing up as a child, do you remember things you used to do to like entertain yourself? Were there...
Well, I remember my playmate who was living across the street on East 15th Street. There's 5th Avenue. She was a year older than I, and my younger brother, used to play cops and robbers with us. And he made us those wooden guns with a rubber band and a clothespin.
Yeah.
Remember? Well, anyway, he was always a good shot and would hit us. Mm-hmm. So then we would cry and weren't going to play with him anymore, but we always did, even so. Play. We had, as I say, a lot of land to run around. Mostly we would play in the backyard by the garages and not in the front of the funeral home.
Mm-hmm. All right. So at the time it was much more... there was a lot more greenery and ruralness and things like that?
Yes, there was a vacant lot across the street. But we had a neighbor right next door to us and a neighbor next to the lot on the other side of the street. And then where my friend June Wills lived, there was an apartment and her duplex. So there were things that were starting to grow up in that neighborhood. But I remember my brothers having a lot of fun in the vacant lot that was directly across the street. They built like a cave. Oh, wow. They would have their meetings. Wow. Underground.
Yeah. That's great.
And there was always, on the East 15th Street, which was not the front of the mortuary, but always kick the can and tap the finger, and you don't see that anymore.
Yeah. Oh.
Playing out in the street, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a lot of roller skating we did, and bicycling. And then on into like junior high school and high school, there was all the kids would go skating, roller skating, and bicycling across go down to the lake and ride around Lake Merritt and skate around. And then in the later years, like in high school, there was Edie's.
What is Edie?
Ice cream fountain.
Oh. Okay.
That was on Lakeshore Avenue. And after skating around the lake, we'd go to the Edie's for a milkshake or Coke or whatever, and spend the evening dancing, ballroom dancing. They had a jukebox, and we'd put nickels in and dance and dance.
Wow.
So that's the childhood, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Going into middle school, do you have other memories of specifically school that you remember, or?
Well, yes, Westlake, 7th, 8th, and 9th was a very fine school, very new and up to date, and there were two teachers. One was a singing instructor, and the other was for dance. And each year, around Christmas time, they do wonderful performances, and the singing and the dancing. So I remember those. I was in them, in with the dancers every year. Oh, there was a little shop down. I say down. The school grounds were up on a hill, and there was a nice hill with a big W on the front lawn. You know, a hedge that they kept. And then there was a little hangout, like where the kids would have lunch and just get away from classes, and that was called the Green Shutters. I don't know if that's... That's it.
Okay. What about when you went to Oakland High School? What about that? When you went into high school, do you have any other memories from there?
Well, again, that was the dance teacher. And I started a club.
Oh, okay.
There were all kinds of clubs, High Y and Key Club. And did you have those in your high school?
We had like a cooking club, a math club,
etiquette club, Latin.
There was chess club, different languages and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. So I started Le Danseuse, and the girls who liked to dance joined the club, and we would put on a little programs once in a while for for the school. They had a nice stage, so I was president of that club, and I was president of the senior class, and of course I just always remember the dances. We had dances, ballroom dancing, and the boys and girls would come into the gymnasium, and they were supervised, and someone would play the recordings, and boys and girls would would circle the room, and the music would stop.
Mm-hmm.
And then whoever you stop next to, you dance.
Yeah.
There was a lot of running around for that. And so that was nice. And then on my senior year, I had a steady
Mm-hmm.
boyfriend, and so we did a lot of dating and going to dances. So, and then a lot of classmates, we went to the university out in Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined a sorority, Chi Omega I was, and I was an art major. So I was quite... there's Mr. Obata, who was a famous Japanese painter. And then I had him for 4 years, so enjoyed that. And I was asked to join the Orchesis Club, which is Honorary Dance Society.
Okay.
And that was after class. It was not one of your classes that were, given marks to.
Yeah.
So that was a good experience. A dance teacher, Miss Sarnowski, she was very talented, and we learned a lot of Martha Graham technique, modern.
Yeah.
So that was not ballet, but I studied on the side ballet from Raoul Posay. He was quite well known in Oakland, and sort of started the Oakland ballet at the Oakland Auditorium only for 2 years. And then I can't remember the name of his. Oh, Ron Guidi, who was a pupil of Raoul Posay. He carried on Oakland Ballet, and I think he has only been retired about 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he carried that on. And then after college, I would dance professionally at lodges and women's clubs and at a hotel maybe in San Francisco, the Fairmont Hotel and the Mark Hopkins and so forth. Well, anyway, I did that, and one grandma wanted me to teach her 2 granddaughters. So I did in the big room that I told you about on the 3rd floor. So if there was a funeral, we had to be very quiet. But if not, we could jump and run and sing and dance. So then that was like from 1940, from after high school. No, I did start earlier, like 1938. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
What now? Shall I go on from there?
You can. I was going to ask about the different types of dance you learned and over the years.
Oh gosh. Well, my dance teacher, she taught at the Hotel Claremont. Grace Burroughs was her teacher. After she started when I was little, teaching in her home on Haddon Road in Oakland. Then she went to India, she and her husband, and she learned a lot of dancing, with the bells and the feet and the they had different positions and things, like in ballet you have different positions to perform. So she taught us her class. In this class, there were only 4 of us, myself and 3 other girls. So we did some East Indian dancing that she taught us with the bells on the feet and the scarf on the head and swish and swish. And one time we danced at the Hotel Claremont in the ballroom in front of the orchestra. So that was exciting. And when she did teach it after she left Oakland and taught at the Hotel Claremont, in one of the big rooms where there was a stage, a small stage. So we were able to use that. That was a good thing to learn. And then, in 1938, my mother took me to Honolulu.
Oh.
At that time, my stepfather passed away, and my mother received some insurance. And she wanted to take me to Denmark to meet the relatives there and, where she grew up and everything. But 1938 was a bad time. Hitler time.
Yeah.
So we couldn't travel. But I had met a friend the year before in Yosemite that I was kind of smitten with. My husband to be.
Oh.
So he had gone on a vacation with 3 other boys, and they ran out of money, so they had to live there and work there. And so when my mother said, we just can't get to Denmark, it's too dangerous. And so I said, Honolulu is a nice place. I'd like to see that. So Mommy said yes. So we went then to Honolulu, and I became reacquainted with my husband to be there. And it wasn't until then came 1941, Pearl Harbor. He's still living in Honolulu, and that was at the time when names were drawn out of the fishbowl, and for the draft, 1940, and my husband Don, he was the first name drawn in Honolulu, and the name was drawn in every state. Do you remember reading about that?
I don't. I'm from Honolulu, but I don't know much about the draft or things like that.
1940, were you there?
No, I wasn't there at that time.
So that was supposed to be an honor, that all these men and all these states and this territory of Honolulu was or Hawaii was a territory then, not a state. So his name was the first one drawn, and had a big parade downtown in Honolulu, down Kalakaua and so forth. And then all these men were sent to camps and were trained. Well, then he, let me see how, well, a year of training, and he was at Fort Shafter.
Okay.
You know where Fort Shafter?
I do.
Well, Fort Shafter is right above Pearl Harbor, like here. You're standing here, you can see Pearl Harbor. And it was the day, December 7th, was the day of the bombing. And my husband was at Fort Shafter packing up. He was to get out. These men served a year in the Army. So he was packing his gear when Pearl Harbor happened. So all the men at Fort Shafter were handed guns and shooting at the bomb. The bombing came right over Shafter, down to Harbor, right there. And at that time, or since then, we've learned that there were 2 men on Fort Shafter killed. And then, of course, the mayhem at Pearl Harbor and the soldiers at Shafter were my husband and a troop or whatever were to go down on trucks and pick up the dead and the wounded. So that was it. And then, of course, he didn't get out of the service either. And then he was selected to go to officers, OCS, Officers Candidate School in Pennsylvania, back east. And so we had a few dates, because he lived in Oakland, in North Oakland, 61st Street. And so he had, as I say, I met his family, and we became more acquainted, and so he was selected as the main one of his.
Like his
I don't know,
platoon or something, like a captain or a lieutenant or something like that, or a general.
Yeah. number one man of his
company or something like that.
So that was quite an... Oh, and then he was given the saber for being first captain.
Wow.
And so then he asked me to marry him because he was thinking that he would soon be sent overseas. And I couldn't get a train ticket. So we weren't married then. So he went overseas to the China, Burma, India, CBI, and spent 2 years there. Then when he came home, we were married. He came home in 1945. And we had a big wedding. And, of course, things were in a hurry then, you know. And you never knew when he was going to go back into service or what. So we were at the mortuary on our living quarters writing invitations to our wedding. And there's a lot of fire engines and things. We ran to the front of the house and we could see on 10th Avenue where the 10th Avenue Baptist Church was. That's where we were to be married. It burned to the ground.
Oh, wow.
So we had our invitations already printed, but my mother and I, the next day, we'd go to get another church, and the First Congregational Church in Oakland, near the lake. Do you know Oakland at all?
I know where the lake is, and I know that area.
So we were married there, and had printed a little card. Due to fire, location changed. And so we were married, and then we went on a honeymoon to Yosemite. That is where we met. And then when we came home, we lived at the mortuary up on 3rd. And then my husband had the went to embalming college, San Francisco Mortuary of Science, and became an embalmer. So I must tell you that when we met in Yosemite, at one time we were all around the campfire, and the kids and my mother and her friends, we were all chatting and asking the young kids, the men, what they wanted to be when they grew up. And my husband said, I want to be a California Highway Patrolman. So here he is, an embalmer, indoors, with funerals and whatnot, doing well enough. But he said he couldn't work indoors. So he joined or put in for the highway patrol and made it. So he became a highway patrolman. And enjoyed his career there very much. And however, as he was in the reserves, he was recalled to Japan then. And by this time, we had a little girl, and we were living in Concord. So he was sent to Japan, and our daughter, and I lived alone a year, and then John got transferred to the Philippines. Clarkfield in the Philippines. And so there was dependent travel there. And that was taken care of. So we were home we lived in Concord then for a year before we were sent overseas to join my husband. And we lived he was a captain by that time. And we lived on a nice house on the base, and I taught dancing on the base. So I was very busy dancing and then making up programs for different affairs at the base. And then when we came home, we lived at the mortuary for almost a year, and then found this place. We bought the lot. And then, we had seen the homes, and so then you selected your furnishings and location. And we liked this view over here, so that's
gorgeous.
Why we selected this lot.
So about when you went to the Philippines, was that in the 1950s or?
1950. We were there for a year.
Okay.
And when we came, 1951. And it took until we moved in here then in January 1953.
Okay.
And then I taught dancing at Palmer School in Walnut Creek. It's a private school. And I taught dancing for 20 years there. Then I started in this room I missed the Glenview Junior Women's Club in Oakland when we lived at the mortuary. I was still going to the women's club. So when we moved here, I would drive in every month for meetings and different affairs that the women's club, the juniors we were at. And that got to be, through the tunnel and back up. And so I invited a neighbor down there and my next door neighbor if they would like to go to the women's club in Walnut Creek and join a women's club. And they said, well, yes, they would. So the three of us went to a meeting. We had a nice time. They were very nice, but they had to tell us that in their bylaws, their members were from Walnut Creek. They had to live in Walnut Creek. So I said to the gals, well, let's start our own. So we had a lot of neighbors here, and I had a meeting then, 1953, here, and with the help of the district, the higher officers, they helped us form our bylaws and become a club. So I was president for 2 years, and then we had another year. Then it grew so fast that we couldn't meet in homes anymore. It just got too big. And so we decided to form a senior group and then the Lafayette Junior Women's Club. So that happened. And the Lafayette Junior Women's Club is still going strong, and they do a lot of things. And we, the juniors and the seniors, did a lot of things for the Lafayette Community Center. Well, I mean, we put on teas, fashion shows, etc., made money to give to the community center. And the senior group has disbanded 2012.
So recently.
And the juniors are still going. And they celebrated their 60th year. Well, now that I can show you.
Okay.
And they had a big celebration with the husbands and their family at the Lafayette Community Garden. Mm-hmm. You know where that is? It's across from the reservoir.
Oh, okay.
In Lafayette. And they honored me as founder, and they have a boulder there like that with a plaque on it. Mm-hmm. Honor Betsey Young. So if you want to go see that.
Sure.
I'm kind of proud of that. That was a year ago this day.
Oh, wow.
So that's the juniors and the seniors. And then I was told when we first moved here that there's a girl down the street on Dawkins who likes to dance. Mm-hmm. So one day when the kids were in school, I went down and knocked on the door and introduced myself and asked, I said, would you like to dance? She says, come in. So every day when our kids were in school, I would go down and we would dance. And I taught her several of the Hawaiian numbers that I had learned. When I told you we went out, 1938 was. And then we entertained at a few clubs and lodges and things. And I guess we did okay. We got paid $5. So. And so that was a fun. And then Jerry said, wouldn't it be great if we could get a barn, speaking of Mickey Rooney and Judy, And if we could get an old barn and put on a show. And I said, well, Don and I had just been to a program in Danville where one of my dancing friends from college, she and her husband were in a show, and it was played at a high school in Danville. And I said, oh, it was great. I said it was just neighbors and family stuff. I said, I can get the name of the directors and see if they'll put on the show for us at the town hall. So I called my friend Bernadine, and she gave me the numbers of Dan and Louise Welty. So I said, well, I have them. They said they would do it if you'll set a date, and we'll invite them and some people to come and put on a show. So we did, and that was the beginning of La-Frantics. 1956 to 1986, and I was choreographer, and we just made so much money, and we did so well, had such a wonderful time. And Dan and Louise Welty, they had told us, they said, now, when these little neighborhood shows start, they do real good, and for about 7 years. We lasted 30 years. So, 1956 to 1986. And then Ev McLean came in after about 6 years. The Weltys, they had a nightclub in Sacramento area, and so they were quitting, leaving us because they were too busy with their own show. And so Ev McLean came, and she was a wonderful director. My husband was in the show for 2 years, and he was able to, at that time, his time on duty was so that he could be in a show at 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fun. But then his time became so that he was not able to be in the show. And our children, our kids, were able to be with us too, as they were giving out programs. Ushers, and they did that for years. So that's it. And then I had the La-Frantics show. I taught dancing down at the community center. And till 1976. So I had recitals there, and at Palmer School, where I was teaching all classes from kindergarten to the 8th grade. Put on a very large Christmas show every year. And, of course, at a private school, I was working with the owner, the lady owner of the school. She was very clever. She would write a story in the poetic form, and then I would do the choreography. And she would help me with the costumes. I would design the costumes. And at a private school, I could just do what I wanted. Now, at the public school, I had to be kind of careful what I was designing for their costumes. And then I gave at a night gymnastic classes down at the community center, and also at Marimani Gardens. It's a senior home. I gave classes there, so I was busy. Palmer School, gymnastics, and then down there. Oh, and then I taught at Montecito School, too, the recreational group. I think that's it.
And the type of dancing you did, was it a modern or a swing at these places? Or
Ballet.
Ballet, okay.
And then I had hula classes.
Okay.
Oh, and at Palmer School, I also taught ballroom dancing for the 7th and 8th grade kids. So, oh, and then for La-Frantics, the director, we worked together. She making up the numbers and so forth, and then if she wanted a tap number or any kind of number, that I would do the choreography. And one year she decided she would like to do a tap number, and I said, "But Evelyn, I don't do tap dancing." She said, "Well, you learn." So I took tap lessons from a friend of mine that who was in the British ballet. And she taught me how to tap dance, and I taught this tap number that she choreographed. So that was fun. Have I skipped around too much?
No, you've done perfectly. I did want to ask about when you first met your husband. You said you were at Yosemite, and was it people from the neighborhood that got together and went to Yosemite, or how?
Oh, no, I did get off there.
No.
My mother and I went to Yosemite at camping. My two brothers they drove us up and set up the camp for us, and then my mother and I would maybe cook breakfast there and then go out for dinner and so forth. And every night they had a dancing at Camp Curry. Have you been to Yosemite? Do you know?
A long time ago I've been there, but I don't know off
Camp
the top.
Curry had that little hut, and they had dancing and an orchestra there. And I would go to the dances in the evening with the girlfriend usually. And my husband worked as a porter at Camp Curry. And so I went with a date to this dance, who happened to be the lifeguard at Camp Curry. And we were dancing, and all of a sudden we went by these young, good-looking kids. And this was a costume party.
Mm-hmm.
So they were all dressed up and having a good time. And as we went by, they whistled. Can't do it. And then all of a sudden, this clown came and tapped my friend on the shoulder, saying, he would like to dance with me. So he was such a good dancer that we just glided around this. And I really couldn't tell what he looked like, but I knew that he was good looking. He had clown makeup on and a wig and this big clown costume. And such a good dancer. And he asked me if I'd like to go swimming tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So I said yes, I would, and I told him, where we lived, Camp 16. So the next day, we did make a date, and the next day, my mother and I are standing there waiting for my date. And I said, "Oh, Mama, look at this." Here comes this very handsome man. And so anyway, then from then on we dated and went steady life. And then when summer was over, he invited me to family affairs, and we dated and so forth until he went back went to Honolulu. Yeah. Had reservations to go with three of his friends. So then I guess it was just mostly correspondence until I got my mother to go to Honolulu.
So about how long between your time at Yosemite and when he went to Honolulu, about how long was that? Was that a year or less than a year?
Oh, gosh, it was... how long after Yosemite before he went?
Yeah, to Honolulu.
I was only months.
Oh, it was only months. Okay.
We left in... Well, we had summer... in Yosemite, and then he was working over the May Day holiday, and my mother and I went back to Yosemite. We had dates and dance, and then he left in November.
Okay.
So.
And at that time, you were in high school then, or you were
college?
College, okay.
Yeah. So then, now I'll go back to when he was in the funeral business
Okay.
with my family. and then into the highway patrol. And he was, of course, he had to go to the academy and graduate. Then, when he graduated, he was assigned to Contra Costa County. Now, I mean, if that isn't lucky, instead of going somewhere down the desert all alone. So, we moved to Lafayette then in 1948, and we were downtown in a duplex, and we lived there for about a year and a half, and then we bought a little home in Concord. And my daughter is not in school yet. She's about 4 years old. And so then when we lived in that home in Concord, Don was recalled in the Korean War now. So that's when he went to Japan. And that's where my daughter and I spent the year alone. Was in Concord. Then we went to the Philippines. There was dependent travel, I told you then. And so then we came back home. And moved to this home.
If you're all right for a few more questions.
Sure.
Okay. I was going to ask about your children. I know you have a daughter. Do you only have one daughter? Or do
One
you have
daughter.
Just one? Okay.
And she went to Burton School, just walked down the hill. Burton School is the Lafayette Community Center. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, but yeah.
So that's where all of the kids here went to school. Burton. So how long has it been a community center?
I'm not sure.
Well, anyway, it was a grammar school.
Okay.
And then she went to Spring Hill and then to Del Valle. Now, all 3 schools are closed. Del Valle is, they have classes there on that campus. But that was a nice school, nice high school. And then she went to UC Davis. And then to Diablo Valley to dental hygiene school.
Okay.
So I was very pleased that she was a hygienist and worked for many years in Richmond for Dr. Van Dyke. So she retired last year and is having a wonderful time. And with Mr. Bruce Moen, they're going to be married soon. Right now they are in Europe, from Spain and then they're going to Paris, and then he has a daughter who is married and has 3 small children.
Mm-hmm.
So then they're going to London and they'll be with them. They'll be home Mother's Day. So she's enjoying her retirement.
Sounds wonderful.
And they, oh no, she was married, divorced, and she has 1 son who has 1 daughter, so runs in the family.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, now she lived in Berkeley in a nice little bungalow with her 1 son. Then when he married, he went to UC Santa Cruz, and when he married after college, married a girl from Atlanta, so they moved to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple of years ago, they both liked California better than where she grew up. And so they moved back and to stay with Kristen in Berkeley. And then her man lives in Walnut Creek.
Mm-hmm.
So she moved to Walnut Creek, and grandson and wife and daughter moved into her house. So it's a fine arrangement.
Yeah.
So,
During the World War II years, you were in Oakland at the time?
yes.
And,
yeah, living at the mortuary.
okay. And I was just curious of what that was like living. I've never had to live in that type of World War II era. Like, was there a big change all of a sudden, and you saw surroundings or things like that change suddenly, or?
Well, it was very tough, I think, for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Gas rationing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, being in the funeral business, we were able to get gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
We had to have gasoline. And they allowed gasoline to people who had funeral homes and cars and so forth. And but there was still a lot of rationing for food, which was and nylon stockings were hard to get. And during that time, I also what would I say? Performed at like there were at the Hotel Oakland. They had dances, and I some couple of times or so would go there and teach dance for the men and the hostesses, they were called. Or if they had a show on the stage at the Hotel Oakland, I would perform maybe a hula or something. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think this is my last question. If I was just curious, when you went in 1938 to Honolulu with your mother, how long did you stay there for that? Was it a fast?
We were there a month.
Oh.
And we went Lurleen. And Don and I would go to the islands every year.
Mm-hmm.
Every year. And then we would bring Kristen, and then we would bring Kristen and Zachary, his the grandson. So we've spent, but I haven't been back since my husband passed away. 5 years haven't been back. So, now, any other questions?
I think that's all from me, unless you want to add anything else.
Interview ends at 2:25 p.m.